Lew Rockwell is our guest. He's the founder of the von Mises Institute. He also served as Ron Paul's chief of staff in his first stint in Congress. And he also helped write many of those great newsletters on top of it. And, of course, he's a prolific writer today at LewRockwell.com. And I always find it informative to get him on with us. And I appreciate him spending the next 52 minutes with us here today. We'll also intersperse some of your phone calls for people that are patiently holding. I would just add that we have breaking news. Our sources say that it's about a 95% probability, and it is booked out, and they've met there twice before. Chantilly, Virginia, builder stinkers are to meet there, and the Washington Post even admits that they are to pick the vice president. So now they've gone from denying it exists to admitting that they basically are going to pick Mitt Romney's vice president. They said that last week. They said, oh, he's going to a Bilderberg steering meeting down in South America while Obama's there, Rubio is, to build his international cred and meet with some Bilderberg people. What? So now we've gone from it doesn't exist to it's out in the open. I want to bring this up first to Lew Rockwell, then we'll get into whatever's most important on his radar, and then I want to get into all the crazy bills where the IRS outside of a jury or court says you can't travel, right out of Soviet Russia, right out of Stalinism. We've got the announcements of drones, satellites watching us, carbon taxes. Forbes magazine writer says burn down people's houses if they don't agree to carbon taxes. I feel like a liar when I say that. It's so over the top, but he said it. I mean, these people, you know, Lou, I think the authoritarians know the worm is turning, and they're starting to act like chickens with their heads cut off. What do you think about all this?
Well, they're the worm. We're not the worm. But sure, I think people are beginning to wake up. I think right after 9/11, I must say I was concerned that you know, we were going to get much more of a totalitarian state. I was right in that, but I was concerned that people wouldn't really be resisting it. But I think there is more and more resistance, especially among the young. We see it in the Ron Paul campaign when he gets 8,000 students coming out to talk to him at UCLA. Kids hanging in trees, climbing up in trees and staying there for hours just to watch him. We can tell there's an intellectual revolution going on among the young, and of course among those of us who are not young as well. There's, I think, more and more knowledge of what's happening, more and more anger at what's going on, more and more worry, and more determination to do something about it. And this is the key. If people will withdraw their consent from the government, from the establishment, from the whole regime, and not play ball, then they can't actually do it. They can't actually work their dastardly deeds against us.
Well, you're right. We're trotting on their tyranny now. They're trying to break our will, and so they're trying to lash out. Their worm is turning, to go back to the old Shakespeare quote. What do you make of them trying to set up internal checkpoints and saying the IRS will take your passport away? The passport is the proof of the citizenship. The Supreme Court has rolled over and over again. You cannot revoke citizenship. It must be freely given up.
Well, I might just mention, if we go back in history, passport is a relatively recent thing. You know, there was a time before the turn of the last century when mostly you could travel wherever you wanted to travel. You didn't have to have documents. You didn't have to get the permission of the various governments or police. If even in one of the most interesting things John Maynard Keynes wrote, and one of the few things that was not a bunch of lies, he looked back before World War I and he said what a different world this was. That if a business person in London wanted to go set up a business in Paris, he just took the train and went over there and was able to rent a place and start his business. And the currency was sound. It was a gold standard. And he talked about just how much, it's funny, I guess even Keynes had a conscience. And he talked about how things were so much better in those days. So the passport was invented as a means of the government to control us, to control our travel. Now, of course, they're putting chips in it, as we know, and they're making it much more they want to have an internal passport too, whether it'll be the current passport or something else. They do indeed want to control our travel, as you mentioned. Barbara Boxer has a bill that is suggested by the IRS. Of course, these Congress people, even the evil ones like Boxer, are mostly just puppets. And so she was asked by the Treasury Department to introduce this bill where if they decide that you owe them money, they can stop you from leaving the United States. You have no right to travel. Maybe they'll put you in your house and have a device around your ankle to keep control of us all too. It's always important, I think, when we're thinking about any of these things, these horrible things that are going on these days, as well as the good things, that every government would like to be a totalitarian state. That's always their ambition. That's the ambition of the people who go into government, and it's the ambition of the big private interests that are connected to government and benefit from government. They would all like total control over over the peons, over the mundanes, over the poor slobs, as they think of us, who go and work every day and are the actual producers in the country. So what is it then that keeps every government from being totalitarian? What is it that prevents things like what's happened since 9/11 in this country from taking place? It's popular resistance. So when you have something like 9/11 that so drastically diminished popular resistance to government spying, government intrusions and controls of every sort, then the government just immediately expands. And we know they're expanding in these tremendous ways. We have, Paul Craig Roberts pointed out the other day in pointing out that really China is in many ways freer than the United States. That at least in China, you don't have the prime minister saying, by the way, nobody in China has any rights, so we can kill you, we can jail you, we can torture you if we decide you're a bad guy. Even they don't say that. Only the U.S. says that kind of thing, and of course carries it out. But again, I think there's optimism abroad because of young people and because of just what we see as we can call it the Ron Paul movement, although it's actually, as Ron Paul points out, broader than himself, of course. It's a libertarian movement. It's a tremendous reaction to all the horrendous stuff that's going on. That doesn't mean we've got an easy path ahead. Things are going to be very, very difficult, much more difficult economically. Obama is, of course, even worse than Bush. Hard to believe anybody could be worse than Bush. Obama is worse than Bush. And I imagine that Romney will, if he's elected, will be worse than Obama. If Obama is reelected, he'll be worse than Obama the first time. So, I'd say we can't look to government as our salvation. Nothing good ever comes out of Washington, D.C. It's really a carbuncle on the American body politic, and so we can't look to them. We have to look to ourselves, look to our neighbors. We have to make the preparations for troubles ahead, personal preparations, financial preparations, also ideological and educational preparations. We have to read. We have to read books. We have to read the right kind of things on the internet. We have to educate ourselves to understand what the heck is happening. We need to know some economics. We need to know some real history. We need to know actual political science. We need to know about the nature of the state, which is, as Murray Rothbard said, a gang of thieves writ large. If you think of government as a gang of thieves writ large, it really explains everything, and you won't be surprised at what they're trying to do. And you know that the one thing we can do as they're trying to steal everything from us, our liberty, our money, our lives, our children, our homes, our businesses, our communities, that we have to resist them. And the first step to resisting them is to know who they are, what they are, why they're doing what they're doing, and why we should oppose it.
In fact, I want to inject a point on the subject that you raised, the foundation of what is the state. And those that support big government and the monopolies that it creates have created, through the controlled corporate media, back when it still had dominance, this idea that to not trust the state is un-American, that to not blindly believe known certified liars is somehow insane, and that you're a conspiracy theorist if you don't buy into whatever the system is shoveling at you. But if you go back to the Founding Fathers and common sense, if you go back thousands of years ago in every culture, the population knew there was a corrupt elite ruling over them, and the corrupt elite was in castles with armed forces, basically keeping them in servitude. But in comes in the 20th century, and now 21st, more sophisticated propaganda, and they create this idea that the state loves you and wants to take care of you, and that it's weird to not out of hand just trust them. But take George Washington. He was the first person who ever had executive power like that in more modern history, who did not become king. They wanted him to. And when he left after 2 terms and went back to be a farmer, because that's what he really enjoyed, the King of England said, today George Washington's the greatest man in the world. And it was because no one would give up that type of power. And so That original Americana idea is so precious, and the system claims it's alien and radical. The truth is the system is what is alien and radical. I want you to comment on that.
Well, there was an interesting column in the Washington Post recently where it was moaning and groaning about the horrible Secret Service scandal and the GSA scandal. These are so horrible they would undermine people's trust in the government. Well, of course, people should have no trust in the government, or rather, you can trust the government to always do the evil thing. I mean, if they can get away with it, if they don't do the evil thing, it's because they either haven't thought of it or they don't think it's in their own interests, or they can't get it together to do it, because, of course, government is the most incompetent agency ever to exist. Anybody who's ever been in the military or worked for the civilian part of the federal government and is willing to tell the truth will tell you that they've never seen anything like this. I mean, it's just the waste, the corruption, the nastiness, the controls, and this is what, of course, they want. They want all of America to be like an airport. We're all wait patiently in line. We're afraid to look them in the eye, or maybe we're supposed to look them in the eye, or otherwise you're a terrorist. And the blue shirts can do whatever they want to you, your children, your parents. You just have to go along, let them X-ray you, let them question you. You have no rights, and they've got total control. So that's what they.
It's off the chart. When we come back, I'm gonna ask you. I don't know yet. What's number one on Lew Rockwell's radar screen? LewRockwell.com. I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com, and I got a bunch of other news. We're gonna raise with Lew coming up. Sick of the globalist eugenicist control freaks adding poison to your water and laughing as you get sick and die? Start purifying your water with ProPure. My friends, I've done a lot of research, and the best gravity filter out there, bar none, is ProPure, and it's available discounted at Infowars.com. Its filters are silver impregnated to prevent bacterial growth. There's no priming required. It's NSF 42 certified. Optional fluoride filters can reduce fluoride up to 95%. Easy to set up and use. Doesn't require electricity. Purify water from lakes, streams, ponds, and wells. This filter system leaves in beneficial minerals, which is key. Save money by not buying bottled water and avoid BPA that leaches from the plastic. ProPure is the best gravity-fed filter out there. It's what my family uses. Infowars.com already has the lowest price on ProPure. But if you add the promo code WATER at checkout, you get an additional 10% off at Infowars.com. You can also call to order 888-253-3139. I want to get into politics, the election, with Lew Rockwell, who's a real expert on that, and the fact that Ron Paul has already won, as he wrote a few months ago in a piece. And I also want to read a quote out of Light and Liberty, Reflections on the Pursuit of Happiness, Thomas Jefferson. This is a book by Thomas Jefferson, re-edited and released. A guy came to my house and put this on my doorstep once. My wife got pretty mad, but it was a good book. Well, she had a 357 and told the guy to leave. He was knocking on our door at 10 o'clock at night trying to give me this, but I didn't know how close he came. But not a good idea to come to my house. Side issue. Let's go back to Lew Rockwell. Lew, grab bag of everything going on right now. What's front and center on your radar screen?
Well, it's, so much bad that's happening, but I do notice, Ron Paul just wrote about this, in fact, that there's a new, if you remember the SOPA bill, S-O-P-A, that was designed to take control of the internet in the name of so-called intellectual property. That bill was defeated, thank goodness. Now there's another one, even a worse one, called CISPA, C-I-S-P-A, and these bills are both designed by the recording industry and the movie industry and by the NSA and the FBI and the CIA and all that, to work together to crush the internet and to make sure that the movie industry and the recording industry can get what I would argue are unjust profits through the government. So it's in the name of stopping, quote unquote, theft on the internet that they want to take total control. They are. Before our eyes, of course, they are doing more and more
free speech, make us pay for it, get rid of due process, instead of them going out and enforcing their so-called copyrights.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I would argue that both copyrights and patents are illegitimate grants of government monopoly, but the way that it was in the Constitution, everything was standable. But starting under the Reagan administration, this was stepped up to such a horrendous extent. One of the excuses was to keep Mickey Mouse in copyright. by the Disney company. And Ronald Reagan was always sort of the agent of the Hollywood mafia among his other roles in life. And so he, rolled over for them, and these things were put in. It keeps getting worse and worse. They keep extending their copyrights, and
they're trying to say now you can't show a newspaper on TV, the lawyers are. And of course, it's all made up. A lady called earlier and said the police are telling them you're not allowed to defend yourself in your home anymore because of the Zimmerman case, and that you've got to call, because a cop said so? That's just the way it is?
Well, you have the TSA invading flea markets looking for, allegedly counterfeit shirts. That somebody's producing a shirt that might look like, allegedly like, a Gucci shirt or some expensive shirt. They were making an inexpensive shirt.
No judge, no jury, they just seize them.
Just go in, seize the property, put them in jail. So it's all a horrendous tyranny, and this is right across the world. The U.S. government uses this as a control. They're trying to extradite right now a boy from England who has Asperger's syndrome, and as a teenager put up a website that had on it links to BitTorrent sites and other sites where you could download movies. So just the fact that he had a site, which is not illegal in England, by the way, that had links to other sites, the U.S. government wants to take this kid, bring him back to this country, and put him in jail for 12 years. 12 years. And this is another thing going on in this country, of course, the growth of the prison industrial complex. There was recently a black lady, a homeless lady, who had enrolled her child in a better school district than one she lived in. They're putting her in jail, again, for 12 years. 12 years. So one thing we always need to keep in mind is the people who work in the government have what St. Augustine called the libido dominandi, the lust to dominate, the lust to rule. They like to take us and do this. They get a charge out of this. They love this. So not only is the prison industrial complex making a lot of profits for people, a lot of these profits, prisons are profitable, and of course the government prisons are built by private industry and so forth. So there's always that thing. But people who work in the government love putting people in jail. They love starting wars. They like killing people.
They like torture.
These are not good people. We don't want them running our lives.
Well, that's right. Who wants a job at the TSA grabbing women and children's genitals? And it's coming out that they enjoy it and like it and tell people so.
Well, when Ron Paul had his first experience with this, and it was horrendous. He has titanium knees, so he has to, when he goes a commercial, he gets the full feel up.
Stay there. I want to hear the story on the other side. Long segment coming up. LewRockwell.com. He's our guest. We'll get into the election, a bunch of other news on the other side with Lew Rockwell, the consummate libertarian and right-hand man for many years to Ron Paul. We'll get his view on so many things coming up. Stay with us. And it is infested with gangs that call themselves government. Then there's these big mega corporations to a group that are all anti-free market, the big Fortune 100, sitting on top government, sucking through government off the population and corporate welfare and trying to make the general public dependent, and J.P. Morgan administering the welfare cards and the food stamps and the... It is a nightmare. And Lew, I want you to finish your Ron Paul story, but then I want to just get this question out now. I'll do it after, but sure, people are waking up. But that's people that can tie their shoelaces. One way or the other, half the population is on the government mammary gland.
Yeah, and of course, this is right after the Ron Paul story, I'll say a little bit more about that, but I'll just finish that this was the first time he had to go through the full TSA treatment. He has titanium knees, therefore even if he wanted to go through the x-ray, he can't. They won't let him, and he got the extremely intrusive and horrendous examination by the TSA. And Ron said to the man, he said, how can you stand to do a job like this? And the man looked at him in the eye and said, I love doing it. So yeah, they do. Of course, these are not, I'm sure there are some decent people out of the 40 or 50,000 TSA blue shirts who are caught up in this. They didn't have a job. They needed something. But really, the kinds of people who get hired by the government, if they're decent people, it's a mistake. It's a mistake they're in there. They don't want decent people in the government. They want people, again, who are willing to do this to you. That's their philosophy.
Listen, when like top movie stars in LAX now, it turns out stalkers are battling and doing anything they can to become TSA because it's Hollywood stars all day coming through, and they go crazy, and it's like a celebration. It's on video and photos, and they just grope them and grab them. And Miss USA, they go in her pants in Dallas because they knew who she was, and actually in her body. And listen, I was with Jesse Ventura. I have flown out of Vegas where I was doing a video shoot with Ventura, and the guy knew who I was and said, I have, quote, Lou, he actually said this, I have an administrative privilege. And he said, by the way, I heard your show yesterday from here in Vegas and all this, and was rubbing on me and getting off on the power of it, clearly getting off on it. And when I flew with Ventura out of Atlanta, they all knew who he was, were talking to him, and were taking their time squeezing his genitals. And I couldn't believe it. I started taking photos, and Ventura was embarrassed and said, stop. And he made me erase them. And he later sued him, of course, and it got thrown out. And they actually went. I don't want to go over it. The point is, exactly, they told Ron Paul, I love it. They love it. Look how many are getting busted. Sorry, go ahead.
No, of course they love it. These are the kinds of people who go into the government, tend to go into the government. Not every postman is a bad guy, but the people who tend to go into the government are like this, and certainly the people who rise in the government. F.A. Hayek wrote a great chapter in his book, The Road to Serfdom, on why the worst rise to the top in government. Unlike in a private business, in private life, the worst do not tend to rise to the top. But in government, the worst people, the worst liars, the worst power mongers, the worst warmongers, the people who are just love all that's evil, they are the ones, the demagogues, they're the ones who rise to the top and get and become, president of the United States, for example. These are not the good guys. These are the worst people in society.
And he looked at Ron Paul. He told that story here on air. It made the Drudge Report. He looked at him and said, I love this job.
And he said, no, he said, I love it. Ron said to him, how can you stand doing a job like this? And he looked him in the eye and he said, I love it.
I love it.
So yeah, at least he told the truth for that moment. My guess is he wouldn't tell the truth in public, but he told the truth with great animus too, of course. These people, they also hate us, by the way. As you point out, they talk about they're going to care for us. There's always, they're helping the poor, they're helping the elderly, they're helping the sick, and so forth. They of course are hurting all these groups. And we could just see, if we think of the government has passed so many laws, very intrusive laws in the name of helping the disabled or in preventing assaults on children. So when the government was in control, of course, we see how they treat the disabled in the airports. We see how they treat children in the airports. Again, you can't believe a word they say, or rather, you can typically believe the opposite of what they say. So that's the rule of thumb.
Well, it's not typically. Look at the TSA. They lie on every subject and get caught and keep lying. And I just can't believe the American people turn their children over to them. So that's my next question. What do you do about half the population that can't survive without a government paycheck and who believe it's there? It's like that woman who had like 9 kids and was getting like all these dozens of welfare checks. And she said, I deserve more. What are you going to do for me?
Well, we have one of the things that democracy does. Hans Hermann Hoppe has a great book on this, Democracy, the God That Failed. Democracy has been a great invention for government. From a practical standpoint, we end up with Socialist A or Socialist B we can vote for, so they don't worry about who wins the election. But from a ideological standpoint, they convince people that we are the government. You hear Americans saying, "Should we go to Mars? Should we invade Syria?" It's not we doing this. It's this separate entity, this parasitical entity that's called the government and the military-industrial complex and so forth. So democracy has. You talked about earlier how in earlier times people saw the government as the rich people living in the castle and collecting taxes from them, and they correctly saw the government as something separate from them. Democracy makes us believe, entirely erroneously, that we are the government, and it blurs that distinction about who is, as John C. Calhoun said, who's the taxpayer and who's the tax eater. So yeah, there are a lot of people who are getting government checks. The government is still a minority, though. They can't They can't, if they were the majority, the whole thing would collapse. They have to be a small minority. That is, those who are entirely living off the government. But by making a lot of other people a little bit living off the government, they hope to gain their loyalty, and I'm sorry to say they do gain their loyalty. So people are worried about, oh gosh, Social Security is going to go broke, or Medicare is going to go broke. Although those things can't go broke any more than the Pentagon can go broke. As long as they got the printing press, they'll keep everything in existence, because the dollar can be worthless, but all these things will be in existence because they exist for purposes of control. They don't exist to help people. They exist to make people subservient to the government, dependent on the government, mentally dependent on the government, and never to threaten everything. Always to go along, obey them, believe their baloney, whether it's taught in the public schools. I mean, I ask myself, why do people send their kids to the public schools? Why would anybody do that? Some people are forced into it financially, but a lot of people who could easily afford send their children to a decent private school or to do homeschooling, they won't do it because they think, well, this is...
Well, I do, but here's the problem. Then even good, quote, Christian schools or others want to be accredited so your child can, quote, get the credits to go to college or whatever, which is now what more than half of college graduates will never even be able to get a job that pays for half of their debt. It is a fraud because they ship the jobs out of the country by design, but through crony deals and monopoly deals. But now they are, giving them stuff about how great Barack Obama's wife is and, what you're supposed to eat under No Child Left Behind, even in the private schools. They're taking everything over.
Well, of course, they do want to take over the private schools. A lot of these private schools, and you have to be careful, a lot of them are what a friend of mine calls public schools with tuition. So yeah, why homeschooling is really probably the only thing that can where you can entirely be in control of what your children are being taught. But there are good private schools still. There are private schools that fight this sort of thing, that don't just use the government curriculum. But you're right about accreditation. I mean, accreditation is a government scheme. It's a government control scheme. As to college, yeah, more and more people, as you say, are looking into whether, James Altucher points out, even what we think of as less expensive colleges, it's about a $200,000 expenditure because you have to take into account the money you're not earning during the years you're in college. So it's very expensive. These kids end up with huge amounts of debt. Government aid, government takeover of the education system has made impossible what Ron Paul, for example, did when he was in college. He worked his way through school. Now, that's a science fiction idea these days. Nobody can work their way through school because the prices have driven so unbelievably high by the government, benefiting the faculty, benefiting the administration, benefiting the groups that are connected to them, and sticking it to the student. Same thing with medical care. Doctors do great, hospitals do great, Big Pharma does great. Patients get hurt. So this is, again, the way the government does these things. All these welfare schemes are actually evil. They're not. It's not just that they don't turn out the way the government hoped they turned out. The government's motives are always wrong. They're always evil. They always seek control, destruction, taxes, wars, all the stuff they...
Well, let me stop you. Let me stop you. Look at history. That sounds horrible to an individual person. Why would they do that? Individuals always think of, well, why would they want to have a false flag? To take your rights, to be the hero. People always think of things from their individual perspective, and your point of how they're like, we're going to attack Iran. No, we're not. The foreign mega banks that run our criminal government are the ones doing that. We're not putting fluoride in our water. Big chemical companies are paying government to put a toxic waste in your water and making you pay for it. But when you read this book, Behind the Green Mask, Agenda 21 by Rosa Cora, that, by the way, is available at Infowars.com, it's all the quotes, it's all the plans, it's Maurice Strong. They want a post-industrial society where no one is allowed to operate but them. And that raises my next point. Where do you see this battle going? Because, head Gaia scientist James Lovelock has come out, reversed himself, admitted that it's all a big hoax, man-made global warming, but that they needed it to basically be able to sell the public on other things that are good for the environment. Meanwhile, government and socialist states always are the worst. Take the Soviet Union. Now we have, as I mentioned at the start of the interview, Forbes coming out and saying, one of their writers, let's burn down people's houses, let's mark down where they live, let's go get them. And then that's allowed. We have the Justice Department inside the protest for Trayvon Martin trying to get a riot going, confirmed. That's been leaked. I mean, my point is, people shouldn't underestimate how authoritarian they are. So looking forward from history, because not just the way things are. I want where Lew Rockwell thinks things are going, because the authoritarians now, every day I see it, are calling for violence, are calling for dictatorial takeover. They know we're waking up, so now they're settling the idea within their ranks of let's just start arresting people for their speech. There's going to be a big Dealey Plaza protest with 50th anniversary. They've announced no protest allowed. They're leasing to the school book building museum the entire area for 2 days for $110, leasing a park. And they're saying no one allowed there but their people, because they know media is going to be there. I mean, this is just off the charts.
Well, if we think back to what the ancient Romans had as one of their slogans for their empire, divide et impera, divide and rule, divide and conquer. Governments always want to get people fighting against each other. I mean, whether we look at, say, what the U.S. did in Iraq, they broke it up. I mean, so they caused tremendous tensions between the Sunnis and the Shiites and the Kurds and so forth. This is what they want to do in Syria. They're doing it in Syria. This is what they want to do in Iran. This is what they're doing in our own country. So in order to keep people from focusing on their real enemy, which of course is not Al-Qaeda or whatever, it's Washington, D.C., they want to split us up. So of course they promote race war. They promote all kinds of horrible things that we should, liberals should hate conservatives and all the rest. That's what they want, you focusing on that and never to discuss the government. You'll notice if we listen to the neocon, Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, they never discuss the nature of the government. We're always supposed to focus on the evil of flag burning or whatever. So they always want you on some other thing that doesn't threaten the government, but that divides the people, so they will not become united. You don't have to be united. Diversity is wonderful of all sorts. You don't have to be united in any sense except against the enemy. Where's the enemy? The enemy is in Washington, D.C.
So where do you see things going, though? I mean, if you look into a crystal ball, where do you see America in 5-10 years?
Well, first of all, you have to be worried about things like that you've talked about the Department of Homeland Security buying 450 million rounds of hollow point 40 caliber ammunition. What are they doing? That's enough to wage a war. What do they plan to do with that? Is it because they want to seize our guns?
And they're buying armored mobile pillboxes for the highways, and TSA is now nationwide doing gropes and bag searches on street corners and buses. Right. I mean, totally illegal.
That's right, and we have, some of the TSA people have said that there should be these booths at malls and at public libraries and in all public schools. You should have to be groped to go into anything they decide where some phantom terrorist from overseas might be coming. When the actual terrorists, people who spy on us, take our money, run our lives, try to hurt us, are in our own government. I'll put that in quotes. So where do I see things headed? I think there's a battle. I mean, on the other hand, there has always been a battle between freedom and state. This has always existed as long as there's been civilized humanity. Sometimes the bad guys win, and we end up with an Egyptian system where the god is actually the government, and you have to bow down and be the slave of the pharaoh. On the other hand, sometimes we have massive increases in liberty. It happened in the ancient world. It's happened in America and other places. Now it seems like we're in retreat. But the battle I think, never is going to be over until the end of the world. There's always going to be this struggle. So I think the struggle will continue. I think we're going to be, I would say 10 years from now, we will be far better off than we are today. Not that we won't have immense troubles. We have a lot of economic troubles to go through. Who knows what the Federal Reserve is going to do to us? Who knows what the Federal Reserve has already done to us? So we have but the thing is, government is subject to the laws of reality. They all think in government that all they have to do, use their one tool, the gun, put it to your head, and say, do it, or we're going to put you in jail, or we're going to kill you. This, by the way, is what's on the traffic ticket. If you don't pay your library fine or anything else, this is the one way the government has to operate. But the gun can't actually, the gun, for example, is not exactly a creative force when it's used by a private criminal or government criminals. And there are a lot of things they cannot actually bring about. So I think the fact that kids are what Ron Paul, as I mentioned, Ron Paul has actually already won because of the millions of minds he's changed, not only in this country, hearts he's touched, not only in this country, in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe. Kids love Ron Paul all over this world.
There's finally an alternative to the statist left and statist right. When we come back, I want to jam in a call or two, Lou, but I also want to bring this up to you. They have publicly now announced the war on terror is over, but the TSA, the checkpoints, are intensifying, and they say now it's now for domestic groups and libertarians and people. They actually and returning veterans. So they're now admitting what we warned. They're saying, don't worry about Al-Qaeda. They work for us in Libya. They're good. Now the enemy is you. I mean, that's amazing. I want to ask you, why are they hiding everything in plain view now? I guess because they know we've been exposing them, or have they just gotten delusional? We'll get Lew Rockwell's take on that straight ahead. LewRockwell.com. I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com with big breaking news up there right now on Bilderberg, location 2012. I'll be honest with you. I had an important question for Lew Rockwell that I wanted him to answer as we went to break, and now I can't even remember it. Because during the break, Kurt Nimmo said, have you seen my new article at Infowars.com? And I started reading it, and I'd seen this call by the White House. This is racketeering. This is discrimination, like black people come and try to buy your house. They've got the credit, and you say, I don't sell to black people. But see, when government and corporations do it, it's supposedly okay. Bank of America's war on the Second Amendment, they're now telling a major CEO of a major gun company they will not let them do business with them, have bank accounts, loans, whatever. Bankster giant Bank of America has joined the effort to take down the Second Amendment and deny Americans the right to own and use firearms. Kelly McMillan, the CEO of McMillan Fiberglass Stocks, McMillan Group International, and McMillan Firearms Manufacturing, recently wrote on his Facebook page that Bank of America has refused to do business with his companies because they sell firearms. And we're seeing where they won't take ads in newspapers for them. Bank of America admitted its decision was political. His response was to immediately stop doing business with Bank of America. And because they're saying that they won't do business with him. And it goes over it all. I mean, this is just, it's so authoritarian. Lou, what was my question as we went to break? Do you remember?
Well, you wanted to talk about what's ahead. I frankly apologize. I don't remember exactly what you asked.
No, but I mean, I got blindsided by this. What do you make of just of all the authoritarian stuff they're doing? It's not stopping people buying all-time record 5 million guns a month and saying it's because they don't like the government. I mean, they're losing. Don't they get it? And their bullying isn't scaring people anymore.
Well, you can't, something else you can't trust is the big banks. You can't trust the big banks. These are institutions that are inherently corrupt. They engage in fractional reserve banking, meaning that they're fraudulent.
They are the government. They admit in Europe that they've taken over Europe.
No, and they cooperate with the Federal Reserve to bring on the business cycle. If it weren't for the big banks and the Federal Reserve, and banking, I must say, in general, as it exists in this country, we wouldn't have recessions and depressions. So these are not good institutions, and they treat you, of course, like a microbe if you're one of their customers. And so, as you say, they're getting rid of one of their business customers because they don't like people owning guns. Well, I'm sure they don't. Well, people ought to get out of bank. Hope nobody has an account in Bank of America. Get out of Bank of America.
This is Bank of America, so disconnected.
Banks.
Exactly.
Deal with a small bank. You're much better off dealing with a small community bank. You can check the ratings, but you're far, don't deal with these great big banks. And also deal in cash to the extent you can. The government hates cash. The banks, of course, hate cash, because if you're dealing in cash, they don't have that money to be able to pyramid loans on top of it and cause all kinds of trouble and to exacerbate the whole inflation process.
Well, Lou, that's what I was about to say in closing, as we're almost out of time, and unfortunately don't have time for calls, is that they try to charge $5 every time you use your own bank card when they're using your money. People said no. But this shows how disconnected Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are. They think they're God and are trying to shut down real local banks.
But one small thing you can do, again, is use cash. Deal in cash. If you try to get a significant amount, it's actually fun to do it, to go into your bank and ask for a significant amount of your own cash. They hate your guts. They'll do everything possible to make you feel bad that you're wanting your own money. And the reason is because it hurts them when you get that cash out, you deal in cash. So the extent that everybody can deal in cash, deal with a small bank, you're hitting them where it hurts.
Hey, I've gotten out less than 10,000 and had bank managers call me and ask me if I'm a criminal, just to make me feel bad.
Yeah, no, of course. You're not a tool of the banksters. You must be a bad guy.
Because they're the bad guys. Lew Rockwell, amazing interview. Ron Paul has already won the hearts and minds, that is. We'll have to have you back soon to talk about Puppet Romney versus Puppet Obama. Thank you so much, Lew.
Thanks, Alex.
Amazing interview with Lew Rockwell. Stay with us, Infowars.com. Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds?